Well, this has popped up on my radar. Annie Elise now says there is finally a motive for the Idaho 4 case that Bryan Kohberger definitely committed, and don't ask any questions about it otherwise. All right, Annie. I am actually genuinely curious to see what kind of BS you have strung up this time. Because as we all know at this point, you don't look at the files. You don't think for yourself. You look at mainstream media and trust them wholeheartedly. You put no brain power into this. You just simply read off a script. So what script are you reading off of this time? Oh, Annie. Let's see what you got. But before we do, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. I am Dylan Hildreth. This is Hildreth Investigates, where we check the unchecked. We make fun of those who act smart but really aren't. And, well, without further ado, in this particular video, we check the unchecked, and we make fun of those who refuse to think for themselves. All right, let's see what old Annie Elise has to say.
On through all of the court system steps, the sentencing, you feel like you know everything there is to know about the case, but then it just pops back up again with even more insane details that you never expected to see. Well, yeah.
Yeah. It's been going on since July of last year. You know, when everything started coming out and it started making less and less sense to the people who actually go through the documents.
That's where we're at with today's case. The ass crap wad, I don't know if that's a new term, but like the complete loser, scumbag, in my opinion, incel that he is, Bryan.
There's no evidence of it! God damn! We are 27 seconds into this. And you've already flat out lied. You have already proven you know nothing about this case. My God. And I even played the first 3 seconds. You didn't even see the first 3 seconds. Oh my God. Oh my God. You cannot be this stupid. Oh, Jesus. There is no evidence suggesting he's an incel. There's no evidence putting Bryan at the crime scene. There is no evidence of a motive, which is why I'm genuinely curious on what kind of bullshit you're coming up with here. So, all right, let's see.
Kohberger. I don't know how this guy keeps managing to resurface like the fucking plague, but here we are.
I don't know how you continue to resurface. I don't know how you have amassed 1.6 million subscribers when you sit here and continuously lie on what is a absolutely world-shattering case that you are continuously and at this point intentionally getting wrong.
There's more details, more barbaric things, as if it could even get any more awful than it was. And there's a lot.
Yeah, there's an innocent man in prison, and you're sitting here cheering it on. Yeah, it's pretty freaking awful.
That we need to go over. We have been talking about this case for literal years now. But let me just say, if you're new here, or if you haven't.
Literal years. No, it's actually been years. You see, most people with a functioning brain will sit here, and I'll walk this whole thing through. It happens. Oh my God, that's horrific. 4 people killed in their homes. 4 young people. That's horrific. And then we begin to learn more about this case. And there's 2 roommates that survived. Oh my God, they're incredibly lucky. Oh, wait. They waited how long to call 911? Okay, that's strange. And then And then all of a sudden, Kohberger's name pops up from a note from the FBI, and then they claim that it's genetic genealogy. But again, it's hard to trust them because of all the lies that they've told when you go through the documents. But anyway, as we go through, and then we find out that, like, these people were there, those people were there, and this happened at this time, and then we're all just in a holding pattern. And the way that I was looking at it was, okay, with what I know at this point, and this was before the plea deal and after Kohberger was arrested, it was, okay, let's wait and see what happens. He is innocent until proven guilty. At this current point in time, they have not shown enough for me to say that he is guilty, albeit they do have more stuff that we don't know about. And so we sit there and we wait and we wait and we wait, and we're getting to trial, and right at the 11th hour, plea deal. Like, oh, crap, okay. So what's going on? And then the documents come out. And then photos come out. And then more documents come out. And the more that comes out, the more you realize, oh my God, Bryan Kohberger got absolutely freight trained. He is an absolute patsy, and there is nothing in this case that points to Bryan Kohberger other than touch DNA that may or may not have come off the knife sheath. Which, that is weird in among itself. And absolutely nothing the investigators have said has actually been true. So that was just my whole train of thought throughout this entire case.
Heard of it.
Now, Annie Elise, it's just a talking bobblehead. More of there's nothing in there, and she's just nodding along.
Are going to do just a very, very brief little recap for you. But let's rewind and go back in time for a moment. Four University of Idaho students, Kaylee Consalves, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were horrifically and brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus house back in November of 2022. Bryan Kohberger, douche canoe, douche lord of the world, also a criminology PhD student who was living just a few miles away, was ultimately arrested. And he pled guilty in 2025, and he got 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole. That was a part of this plea deal, which still infuriates me to this day, but...
Oh, trust me, that is the only thing in this case that we freaking agree on. Because if this case would have gone to court, there's no way you'd be able to convict. You can't put them at the scene. Most of the evidence you wouldn't be able to use. Definitely wouldn't be able to use the touch DNA because of the chain of custody issues. It came from with the knife sheath. So, yeah, nice try, Annie.
I digress. He was facing the death penalty, but when he pleaded guilty, that was removed. It was taken off the table. But here's the thing. Over 3 years later now, new information keeps coming out. And it's kind of just being talked about in bits and pieces here and there, and not in like one singular way, which you know me. You know I love these big comprehensive videos where you get all the information and it's not...
If you come to Hildreth Investigates, we would have already put some pieces together that completely blow your theory out of the freaking water. But anyway...
like piecemeal. So I really wanted to put it in one place for you. So that's what we're going to do. Today, we are going to be breaking down all the new information coming out. Because in recent weeks, newly released records have now brought forward some of the most gruesome details about the murders themselves, about how the investigators believe the murders unfolded, and what the medical findings actually show. And some of that information, I just want to warn you, it is pretty heavy. And at the same time, the victims' families have now taken legal action, filing a lawsuit tied not just to Bryan Kohberger himself, but to the school that he attended, Washington State University.
Oh, and when she gets to that point, oh goodness. There are going to be some people that's going to have to buckle up for that one. Because I have some strong thoughts on that.
It has raised serious questions about what may have been known about him, when it was known, and whether anything could have been done differently. Alongside all of this, there have also been a lot of theories popping back up that we were seeing when Bryan was first arrested. I mean, theories about a second killer, possibly a sexual motive, a lot of...
No! That is your freaking folk hero, Nancy Grace, and all the other mainstream media like, oh, it was sexually motivated. And the morons at News Nation. No! There is no evidence of it. None. Obviously, there were multiple perpetrators here. Yeah, Annie, welcome to 2023. Any moron with a functioning brain could have picked that up. And here you are on February 17th, 2026, the year of our Lord, and now you're, oh my God, guys, you're not going to believe it. There might be a second person involved. Woo! My goodness. My God. Freaking brainiac over here. Jesus. Yeah, give her the fancy Sherlock Holmes hat and a magnifying glass. My God. Moron. Absolute moron.
Of different things. Now, a lot of this obviously is just speculation, but it's being talked about right now in a pretty big way also. And then there's also this whole separate conversation that has also been floating around online. Reports and rumors that Bryan Kohberger could potentially be transferred out of Idaho to another prison system in a different state altogether. Now, officials are pushing back on that, but the fact that it's even being discussed, it has people asking questions because he has been complaining from day one in his prison cell and like, I don't want this skeezy a-hole to get anything that he wants. So today, what I want to do is I want to walk through what's actually new, what's been confirmed by credible sources, and what is still being so heavily debated now 3 years later, all of these years later, and after he already has pled guilty. Because to a lot of people, this case doesn't feel fully settled. So, hey guys, I'm Annie Elise, and we're...
No, it doesn't. And you're acting like just because he pled guilty means he's absolutely guilty. Even though we've seen plenty of times in the past, people have pled guilty for various reasons to crimes like this. And yet, you sit here and say you're a true crime creator, and yet you do no investigating. You are literally reading off a teleprompter. You're not doing any thinking. You're not doing any investigating. You just have some assistant looking it up and typing up a script for you to say.
We're going to jump right in. The autopsy details and the medical findings that have been coming out now.
Oh, okay. So she said she wants to put everything together. So let's see if she puts what I put together. I doubt it because it would go against her narrative.
Over the last couple of weeks, because these are things that the public didn't really have access to before. And now that they're out there, they're giving people a much clearer, much honest, darker picture of what happened inside that house. According to reports, based on these unsealed documents and the unsealed autopsies, the 4 victims suffered more than 150 stab wounds. That's combined between all 4 of them during this horrific attack.
Mind you, this was all done in like 90 seconds to 3 minutes, according to the documents.
That, remember, just happened within minutes. And when you break down the 150 stab wound number, it is very staggering.
And by the way, and this has been mentioned, this has been gone through many times, and I'm going to go through it one more time. Bryan Kohberger is not mentally or physically capable of pulling off 150 stab wounds in 3 minutes. Because of his various conditions, he doesn't have the motor function, he doesn't have the coordination, and he wouldn't be able to stomach being as bloody as he would have been. You have to remember, He has OCD. He's a germaphobe. He is on the spectrum. He has various other mental issues that would make this physically impossible for him to do. But Annie is not going to mention this at all.
Staggering. Xana, she had the highest number with about 67 stab wounds. We know that she fought back. We heard early on that some of her fingers were almost completely severed from fighting back, but still, 67 stab wounds. Kaylee Consalves had around 38 stab wounds. Maddie Mogan, about 28. And Ethan Chapin had about 17 stab wounds based on these autopsy summaries. And look, it's not just about how many times these young adults were stabbed, it was also about where. Because across all 4 of these victims, the injuries, they weren't random. They were concentrated in some of the most vulnerable areas of the body. See, all 4 victims...
Which leads to somebody with a medical background. Someone who has done this before. It's not Bryan Kohberger. As much as you try to pin everything in the sun under the sun on him, that speaks to someone who has experience. Obviously, Kohberger does not.
Victims suffered severe injuries to the upper body, specifically the head, face, neck, chest, and scalp. Now, these weren't just defensive wounds to arms or hands. Many of these injuries were to the areas that are immediately life-threatening, and that's why the investigators have consistently described this attack as extremely violent and also targeted. Which, think about that. And I'm not going to go into the exact amount, but I would say around 50%, if not more, of the stab wounds to each victim was focused on the face, neck, and scalp. Now, in Kaylee's case,
which means that the person that was killing them was enraged. Bryan Kohberger doesn't know him well enough to be that enraged. He doesn't know him at all. I can almost promise you the first time he's ever heard of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin was when this case started taking off nationally. That is the first time he heard those names. I can almost promise you that.
Specifically, the autopsy report actually said that she had at least 24 stab wounds to that area, then 11 to her chest and 3 stab wounds to her arms. As we know, she also had blunt force trauma to her head as well. Now, based on those findings, experts said that her injuries were so severe and severe enough that she was or could have been classified as disfigured. That detail has come up over and over again too, because it's unusual, even in stabbing cases, and it suggests a level of force way beyond what would actually be needed to incapacitate someone. To disfigure them, it's next level. Maddie...
It's almost like... It's almost like with Kaylee... It's some sort of jilted lover. Someone who may have loved her at one point. And then realized that she's never coming back. On top of that, she's moving to Texas to live with another dude. And she's taking their dog with him. Oh my. I'll let you draw those conclusions. I've already said it enough, and I'll probably end up saying it again here because, again, Annie Elise is never going to put these dots together because she's not smart enough to do so.
Also suffered multiple sharp force injuries to her upper torso and her neck area. The report says that she suffered approximately 13 wounds to her scalp, face, and neck area, 5 to her chest, and 10 to her arms. Now, in Maddie's case, there were also wounds to the lungs, liver, chest wall, and some major veins and arteries. Investigators have said that her wounds were consistent with a very sudden, very fatal attack while she was in bed. So we can only hope that it was quick enough, that she wasn't suffering, that she didn't know exactly what was going on the whole time, and that it was just fast and as painless as possible. But this...
Notice how she didn't get into the blood alcohol level. At least she hasn't got there yet. We'll see, though. We'll wait and see.
This is also where I have to just pause for a second, because this next detail, it's terrifying, and it's also kind of confusing, but it is raising a lot of questions recently. According to a defense expert, Maddie and Kaylee's bodies may have been moved, posed, or staged.
Okay, so she doesn't even get to the blood alcohol level. Because that's a key part too. And no, this is not one of those, oh, she shouldn't drink it that much, blah, 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 blah. No, this points to the credibility of a quote-unquote witness. Some say witness, some say victim, I say potential perpetrator. Or at least a part of the conspiracy to do so. And it dates back to Bethany Funk. She said that her and Maddie took Murphy outside that night. But given Maddie's blood alcohol level being 4 times the legal limit and on the verge of alcohol poisoning, Maddie would be physically unable to take Murphy out. So that was a lie. So what actually, and she certainly didn't go up. If she made it to her bed, that's an impressive feat in among itself. But I don't think she did. I think there is much darker things at play here. I do think that Kaylee, and I do think that Maddie was placed in the bed. Was she killed in her bed? I don't know. I do believe, I would lean towards yes, but to suggest that Maddie went up the stairs, back down the stairs, let Murphy out with Bethany, came back in, went down to the first floor to ask if Bethany had Murphy, then to go back up the stairs, and then back up to the 3rd floor to her room, which we still don't have the ending to that story, is just not in the realm of possibility given Maddie's blood alcohol level. So, we going to connect those dots, Annie? I mean, you did say that you were going to connect all the dots together. Of course not. But anyway, I even forgot what she was talking about, so let's see.
After they were killed. This defense expert pointed out that when Maddie and Kaylee were found, they were lying together in the same bed, which is fine, but that they were partially covered by a comforter. They also indicate that Kaylee's head was moved from being on the pillow to being on top of Maddie. So based on that positioning, the expert suggested that it was possible that one or both of them had been adjusted or repositioned after this attack, or that maybe the bedding had been pulled up on top of them afterward to hide what had happened. Or
and again, on a more serious note, that points to instant regret. You want to hide what you have done. It just hits you what you have done, and it's kind of like that moment, and that's what that screams. So these people who are saying that are pretty much boxing themselves in. Kohberger, I don't think would be capable of doing that for somebody that a stranger like that. He's not capable enough of killing, period, let alone killing a complete stranger and then suddenly feeling remorse. This, again, points to somebody who loved either Kaylee or Maddie at one point. And given the rage that was unleashed onto Kaylee, you would point towards Kaylee. You have somebody who finally snapped, went off on Kaylee, and then after that felt such a great remorse that he put them kind of together, like leaning in on each other, and then put the blanket over them to cover up what he had done. That's what that says. But of course, Annie's going to twist it into something else.
Conceal it some way.
There was talk from one of the experts that was potentially going to be called in this case that there might be evidence to suggest that Kaylee and Maddie's bodies were posed after they were killed. Do you think there's anything to support that?
Well, I think that one of the subjects, and I can't remember, forgive me, the name is escaping me which one, but a head had been moved off of a pillow and then onto essentially the surface of of another body, and that would be
I
glaringly
think
obvious.
it was Kaylee onto Maddie, but yeah.
Right. So Kaylee onto Maddie, and Kaylee's head, according to this expert, was actually resting on the pillow. And I can get into all of the technicalities here, and just very briefly, the way you try to understand that. Hair in particular that is super saturated with blood. If you think about a dirty mop string, and this is the way we kind of describe it to our students, it leaves behind almost this kind of spaghetti pattern behind it. You would have lifted the head off of that and then placed it onto another surface. And that's indicative of the movement that they're talking about. I can only imagine, again, I have not seen this, but I can only imagine that that's the conclusion this individual drew. Now, there's also an indication that the bodies, plural, had been covered with a comforter. And again, we don't know if faces were concealed. There's a thing that we call.
And again, with Ethan, I know Ethan was allegedly covered up too. So that points to, again, you love this person either as a potential partner or as like a brother. And I'm not saying that the other two triplets were involved. I'm not saying that. Not confident enough to be saying that. But it does point to there being some sort of prior relationship to the victims of the of Maddie, Kaylee, and Ethan. So, but nobody's talking about that.
All in death investigation called face covering, where if you have recognition of somebody, it's a way to, kind of block them out so you don't have to look, because as humans, we identify with one another this way, which is an interesting insight into the interior of this home.
However, prosecutors have pushed back on this pretty firmly, and here's why. They said that, of course, being found together in bed, even under bedding, does not automatically mean that somebody intentionally posed these bodies, but that in violent scenes like this one, bodies can end up in positions that do look deliberate, even if they're not. That people can collapse together, that bedding can shift during an attack, and that blankets can move as a result of movement in the room.
Okay. Okay, again, this is her reading off a script and not actually thinking. If the attack was happening while under the sheet, there would be holes in the sheet. And there wasn't any in the comforter, to my understanding. The comforter was placed over them after everything was done. After it was over. Now, if there were stab marks in the comforter, then we'd be actually having a discussion. But again, this is Annie reading off a script instead of thinking for herself.
Or even during first responder access. But still, the reason that this keeps coming up is because the defense didn't have to point that detail out. It wouldn't have been advantageous for the defense to point that out, if I'm being honest. But then once they did, it introduced a whole new set of questions about what happened in those final moments. Even though prosecutors rejected the interpretation of this, the idea itself stuck. And it's one of the details that a lot of people just can't quite shake. And I have to say too, it's kind of wild that it came from the defense's side, because once that document came out showing that a defense expert suggested that the bodies may have been posed, a lot of people immediately kind of had like this oh shit moment, right? Granted, there was no trial and the testimony was never given in court, but you can imagine the way that it could have backfired if it was said in front of a jury. Now,
How? The way that the bodies were positioned. does not point to like it would be some random stranger coming into the house all of a sudden feeling some sort of remorse after just randomly coming into a house and killing people just for funsies, and then suddenly feeling remorse, and then going down and doing it again, and then walking out of the house without leaving a single drop of blood on the floor, on the walls, outside of the 2 bedrooms. No, this wouldn't have been a disastrous nightmare for the defense. This would have been, they would have been able to say it was somebody who knew these kids, not a random stranger who just said, "Screw it, YOLO." Like, come on now.
Let's talk about Xana's injuries for a moment, because her injuries were very different from the other 3 victims.
Because
her
they're
wounds
defensive
were spread
wounds.
across her entire body, including her chest, upper body, other extremities. However, her autopsy says that she also suffered significant wounds to her head and face. The number and areas of her injuries are in part why investigators do believe that she was awake and she was moving and fighting back during this attack, rather than being attacked while asleep, like Maddie and Kaylee. According to her autopsy, Xana had 23 stab wounds to her face, scalp, and neck, 7 to her chest, 4 to her abdomen, and 3 cuts and stab wounds on her back. She also had 5 on her legs and at least...
So this points to getting wound back up with rage. He had been caught. This night has just gotten even more complicated than it already was. And now he's going to unleash once again. Xana fighting back enraged him even further, and that's how we got to this point. Now, it doesn't quite explain why Ethan didn't do anything. But it does point, as I mentioned, it like points to multiple people. But going off this one person theory still doesn't make sense, because everybody and their cousin would have heard this fight, even the people at 1112 King Road, and potentially even down the street. Because again, anything that happens in this house is heard by everybody in the house. I mean, for God's sake, it was so loud. 1112 camera picked it up.
At least 25 cuts to her arms. Now, those cuts, most of those wounds actually in general, not just the cuts on her arms, were defensive wounds. And we also know, based on the findings, that Xana fought back hard. And Ethan, while he had much fewer wounds overall compared to the others, he still suffered fatal sharp force injuries to critical areas of his body, including 2, his face, scalp, and chest and neck. He suffered 17 wounds in total, the balance being to his arms and to his legs. Now, what really stands out to investigators and to medical experts isn't just the fact that there were head and facial injuries, or even how many there were, but it's how consistent those injury locations were across 4 different victims. Severe wounds to the head, neck, and face, I mean, it often suggests close-range attacks, right? Focused on disabling somebody immediately, rather than just random or panicked strikes and motions. So that's why these injuries keep coming back up now that this has been unsealed, and why people are talking about the discussions about his method. And there's also a lot of arguments about weapons, and in broader conversations about what this attack actually looked like inside that house. The medical findings don't answer every question, of course, but they do show a level of violence and intensity that continues to raise new questions even years later. And that kind of brings us a little bit back again to Kaylee's injuries, because like I said earlier, her autopsy is the one that keeps getting revisited, not just because of how many injuries she had, but because of the type of injuries she had. Because according to the autopsy, Kaylee didn't just have stab wounds. Yeah, she did have multiple sharp force injuries, but she also had blunt force trauma to her head and face. So now you've got 2 different kinds of trauma showing up in the same set of injuries. And that really is what has gotten people talking. Like we talked about a minute ago, a lot of Kaylee's wounds were concentrated around her face, scalp, and neck. And some of those injuries were severe enough to be described as disfiguring, which that's not language that gets used lightly in autopsy discussions. Truly, it's not. And it's part of why defense experts really...
Which is why I firmly believe that they were somehow restrained, whether it be their arms were held, they were tied up, whatever the case. Except what could have very likely happened is Xana found a way to break free, and then a fight ensued. Like I've said before, I think this being like a 90-second, which is insane, 4-minute or even 17-minute ordeal, I think is patently false. This, I think, went on for hours. I don't think Kaylee and Maddie were killed back to back. I think Maddie was taken out very quickly. I think that, and I think it, maybe Ethan was taken out quickly. And I mean, the possibilities are endless on what actually happened, just because nothing that they've said makes sense. So I would hazard, I would speculate that this was a multi-hour torture, and it could have been one of those situations where this was only supposed to be an intense hazing that just spiraled out of control. Somebody finally lost it because either Kaylee said something, Xana did something, or Xana was able to get loose and fight. Either way, something. This wasn't a quick ordeal, and I think Birdie said it best. The starting event wasn't the murder. That's not what kicked this all off. 11-12 proves that, and that exonerates Bryan Kohberger alone. That alone exonerates him. Because everything that would suggest if there was any iota of evidence that proves that Bryan Kohberger did anything, the murder would be the first thing that happened. Which, in the 11-12, that proves to be false. There was torture involved. There was hazing involved. And how it went sideways, we may never know. We'd have to ask Jack. Which one? I don't know. But I do firmly believe that there was a Jack in that house that night. So.
He zeroed in on her case in particular. So the defense argument was basically this. When you see sharp force injuries and blunt force trauma together, it opens the door to questions about whether more than one type of force or even more than one type of weapon could have been involved. Now, they weren't saying that this definitively proved anything, but they were saying that the injury patterns certainly didn't rule it out.
They are trying like hell to say that there was two weapons to one person. Even though you go by default on there being, if there's two weapons, there's two people. Period. That's what you go by with default.
Kaylee's dad, Steve Gonsalves, also had said after Bryan Kohberger's sentencing last year that he was told that there may have been a second weapon used against Kaylee, but they didn't know what it was. Some people, on the other hand, are pushing back pretty hard on that too, saying, the blunt force injuries can happen because of forceful contact, strikes with hands, even someone's head being slammed into a hard surface during the attack. In their view, these injuries wouldn't require a separate weapon at all. But early on, too, one of the things that people thought was that Bryan had worn, those tactical gloves where it's a hard shell on the outside, and that's what could have caused these injuries.
You've got these just horrific injuries that are to Xana's body. She's stabbed on multiple planes of her body, by the way, with a K-bar knife, which is, in fact, a combat knife that's been used by our brave Marines since World War II. All right. And this thing can be used not just for the purposes of stabbing, slicing, but also pummeling people. You can actually turn this thing around on the butt of it, and it makes one hell of a hammer. This thing weighs almost a pound. The blade is just over 7 inches in length. It's wide, and it is meant to kill people with. You know, we've recently had the Reiner case. I think maybe a kitchen knife was used in that. It certainly doesn't marry up
Right.
to what you're talking about with a cable.
So just to be clear, that would explain why you could have different impacts of on Kaylee, right? Blunt force,
Oh, yeah.
sharp force.
But the truth is, without a full trial where medical experts are actually weighing in and questioned in front of a jury, these disagreements are playing out through speculation and media interpretation instead. So when you hear these people just talking online, you know, about this second weapon, it's not something that came out of thin air, but it's also not something that the investigators have ever quite truly confirmed. But I mean,
Because they stopped investigating as soon as the name Kohberger was dropped from the FBI. They stopped investigating and started putting the two together by any means necessary. They didn't do any investigating after that. Because when you look at the documents, which you did not look at, Annie, I can tell, it's clear and obvious. Jack Showalter, Jack DeCoeur, they were at the top of the list for Moscow. And as soon as Kohberger came in, everything stopped. It was, where were you when that Kohberger name dropped? Because everything stopped, and then they started building that bridge towards Kohberger instead of building that bridge to the destination of which the evidence says. So,
I mean, could there have been a second weapon?
yes.
Absolutely. We haven't even found the first one. We don't even know truly what Bryan Kohberger actually did inside that house.
Because he wasn't inside that house. My God. Use your head. He was never in that house. And again, if you want to assume it was just a random person going into that house to kill 4 people for kicks and giggles, obviously they're going to go to the first bedroom. And if you want to sit here and believe that the first bedroom, that is the case, and that he went through the back door, then the first bedroom would have been Dylan. So, what? That doesn't work. And if you want to believe that it came in through the front of the house, which is a possibility, because again, there was a glove found at the scene with blood on it. Whose blood was it? Nobody knows. They didn't test it. And the first bedroom you would have ran into was Bethany's. So that doesn't make sense. So we're back to square one. We have no motive.
Because he's never given a full confession. He's only admitted guilt when he took that plea deal. So we don't know what truly happened. Which, speaking of Bryan Kohberger admitting guilt, there's another theory that has surfaced again since all of this information has come out. And that is the second killer theory. Now, law enforcement has consistently maintained that they believe that one person acted alone, Bryan Kohberger. And they also say that that position has not changed. But
because they're lazy or they're stupid.
in a recent unsealed filing, the defense's forensic expert, Dr. Brent Tarvey, basically said that the medical evidence and some other details involved make it seem like 2 attackers were involved in this crime, not just 1. He claimed that
It is at least 2. Because again, you have to look at everything. Like, everything happened in this one night. And one person is not pulling this off. It doesn't explain why Ethan didn't pop up out of bed to protect Xana. It doesn't explain how nobody heard anything, allegedly, other than, for Bethany, tables moving and cups falling. It doesn't explain why Dylan didn't hear bloody murder. And nothing makes sense with one killer. And you're going to tell me somebody who is physically unable to be coordinated enough to pull this off somehow had an out-of-body experience and pulled this off? Okay. There's maybe 2 people that I can think of off the top of my head that can pull this off. Chuck Norris and Liam Neeson. That's about it. I mean, I would say Steven Seagal, but he would make some noise. He would actually make some noise. But I digress. In all seriousness, though, like, Bryan Kohberger is physically incapable of pulling this off alone. He's physically unable to. All of his mental disabilities prevent that from happening.
The use of multiple weapons, different kinds of force, and the timeline inside the house that it could signal at least 2 suspects. He said that it would have been difficult for a single person to pull all of this off in the window that the investigators believe the attack occurred. And, I mean, as you can imagine, once that idea hit the public, people online took it and ran with it. I mean, on Reddit, for example, there are tons and tons of threads pushing alternate perpetrator ideas, with people saying things like, this should have been allowed as evidence, saying that the defense should have brought up the alternate perpetrator theories during court proceedings, which, if you remember, rewinding it back a little bit, the defense did try to do that, but they were shot down. And that all happened very shortly before Bryan Kohberger took his plea deal. But now that we know that they actually had experts that were prepared to testify on this to try to prove it, everyone is talking about it. And all of that gets even messier with no full trial. A trial where these questions could have been hashed out in front of a jury, people could get more information, because now a lot of this is still being argued in filings, online, in public forums, in these public settings where people are just duking it out. I mean, it's pretty wild in the streets right now online when it comes to this case, because so many people believe not only that there is a second perpetrator, but that Bryan is innocent, which then is he not even one of the 2 perpetrators?
That's me. Yep, that's me. Hi.
Why would he have taken a plea deal? How does that make sense? I don't know. I could talk for hours about that, but let's move on. Now that we've walked through the injuries and some of the unusual patterns in this case, I want to talk about the one question that everybody is still asking. Why did this happen? What was the motive? And the frustrating part is the motive in this case is still officially unknown, and we may never know it. That's the truth. Prosecutors have said over and over.
But you said you said you had a motive. That's what you said at the top of this thing.
That investigators never found a clear reason. No documented relationship between Bryan Kohberger and the victims, no personal connection, nothing that definitively explains why these 4 students were targeted. Bryan Kohberger's plea hearing, the Latah County prosecutor Bill Thompson flat out said there was no evidence of a sexual component. No evidence of a sexual assault, an attempted sexual assault, nothing tied to these murders. And yet,
so that just completely blows your incel theory that you just mentioned about 17 minutes ago in this video.
The idea of a sexual motive, it just keeps coming back. Some of that also comes from...
Because mainstream media keeps bringing it up. You keep bringing it up. You're like, I don't know where it could have popped. It just keeps popping up. I don't know. I don't know. Well, what? Annie, you literally brought it up at the top of the show. What are you talking about? It just pops up out of nowhere, and I don't know where it came from. Like, come on, Annie. Jesus Christ. Because, this wasn't a sexually driven act. This was a vengeance. This was rage. That is your motive. Revenge and rage. That is your motive. But anyway, let's see what Annie has to say on this one.
From the families themselves. Kaylee's dad has publicly said that he believes that there was a sexual angle here. He talked about it.
Even though there's no evidence of it. And Steve can call this. Don't worry, Stevie. You're getting your own video too, buddy. It is coming. Just been a little busy, but it's coming. Don't you worry, Stevie.
Information he says, too, that he was told by people close to the investigation, including claims that Bryan Kohberger had what he described as, quote, weird porn fetishes, with terms like drunk, passed out, gagging girls. And we saw some of this come out, when was it? Several months ago, when some of the documents started being unsealed, where he was searching things about, like, having sex with girls while they were passed out, incoherent, couldn't consent, things like that. And Steve has said that he connects that to what he believes he sees in the crime scene and the injury patterns. And he has been very open to about.
One problem with that. Kaylee wasn't drunk. Ethan wasn't drunk. I mean, they were legally drunk, but they weren't drunk. Nice try. Good attempt. Good attempt, Stevie. Really nice. But that is not the case.
Disagreeing with how prosecutors have framed the motive in this case. Now, that is his interpretation based on what he says and what he was told, and it also does directly conflict with the prosecutor's public statements. So it's something that people will hear, they will sit with, but it's also not something that has ever been backed up with evidence in court. Now, another place that this idea has surfaced is in recent media coverage since all of this new information has come out. There was recently a forensic analyst that said that this case could be interpreted as having a, quote, sexual dimension before fear then took over. That maybe Kohberger went in there having some kind of sexual motive, running on adrenaline, but then when the situation wasn't what he expected, he went into adrenaline overdrive. Or something like that. And that's how everything transpired, which.
What would you possibly be expecting? I mean, for God's sake, there's 5 cars out in the front. So you would imagine there's at least 5 people there, if not more. And you walk in with nothing but a knife? Well, what were you expecting? What could you have possibly expected different? It is a house where 6 people live there. There's 5 cars there. And that's the house that you pick on a random spur of the moment? Come on now.
Based on what we know, either Maddie or Kaylee are believed to be the original target. So the question becomes, did he go into that room with that sexual motive?
Okay. Again, she gets this part wrong. Now, I do believe Kaylee was the target, but I can also undoubtedly see Xana being a target. I can kind of see Maddie being a target, but I think more Xana. But really, the 2 favorites have been Kaylee and Xana. At least in the actual true crime community that I've seen. The 2 favorites have been Kaylee and Xana. And Maddie and Ethan were just unfortunate collateral. And there is also a possibility that I have kind of been looking at is it was 2 separate crimes that just so happened to be with the same MO on the same night. That is also a possibility. But again, I'm looking more towards this was a multi-hour torture session that mercifully ended in death. That's what this looks like. And excuse me. You have a 8-hour Siri's trying to talk to me. and you have this 8-hour window. Well, when you go from the time that they got home, which was like 2 a.m., all the way to noon the next day, you're looking at a 10-hour window for torture, kill, clean, call. And that window could have easily been extended. You have to remember, it was a Sunday. Not a lot of people are doing stuff on Sunday, especially in college, because you're still recovering from Saturday night. But anyway, I forgot what she was originally saying.
But then see that there was another girl there, perhaps Kaylee, that he didn't expect to be there. And that's when he got furious and enraged and decided to kill them because, she was in his way of his plan. That's what a lot of the debate and the conversation is centered around when it comes to the motive theory. But regardless, this forensic analyst's point wasn't that this was the proven motive. It was more that based on certain behaviors and certain parts of the evidence, he believes a sexual motive is one of the several possibilities, something that just can't be completely ruled out when trying to understand what caused Bryan Kohberger to attack these 4 victims. And all of this also directly feeds into why motive in this case has become such a huge part of the conversation. The why. And honestly, the fact that so many different angles keep getting floated, it tells you exactly why people are still digging years later, right? They want to know, they want answers. There never was a trial to get these answers. And now into this next part, I think that we have mentioned before on Headline Highlights a little bit about this, but it's been getting a lot more serious recently. But the lawsuits that the victims' families have now filed and who they're pointing the finger at does start to shed some light. Because at this point, this isn't just about Bryan Kohberger anymore. This is about whether there were missed warning signs and whether the system around him failed in a way that ultimately had deadly consequences. The family of some of the victims have now filed a civil lawsuit against WSU, the school.
Which is why you have seen. And I'm going to leave Annie at that point because this video has gone on long enough at this point. But as far so we've seen the Goncalveses, them making the media tour. They've made their media routes. And I haven't read too much into the actual lawsuit itself. I believe WSU is fighting it. But I gotta do some reading in on that. But we're gonna see. Well, let me rewind them. My mind's a little scrambled right now. So we have seen the Goncalveses make the media tour. Went on Nancy Grace, going on Brian Enton, probably gonna be on Trashley Banfield, and they have kind of backed off on a lot of the things that they were talking about, and they are fully convinced that Bryan Kohberger is the killer, all the way to the point of they are more than willing to just straight up lie, and that is incredibly troubling to me. Which tells me, and it may very well get confirmed if they say yes to a settlement, that they have chosen the almighty dollar over justice for their daughter. That is what this could very well end up being. Because there is nothing that suggests that Bryan Kohberger has the ability to be a quadruple murderer. There is nothing that suggests that he's even capable of pulling this off. There is nothing there that points to it. There's no motive, there's no means, there's no opportunity. And everything that's in the WSU files are just students complaining that he's very strict on grading. So this could end up backfiring on several different levels, especially if they take a settlement. And I'll save the really harsh words for when that settlement comes, and I think it's going to be coming. But if that settlement does come, then Stephen Goncalves and Christy Goncalves chose the almighty dollar in the settlement, whatever that figure may be, over true, real justice for their daughter. And that is going to be incredibly telling. And I think Steve G and Christy G know a lot more than what they're letting on. They may even know more than the police at this point. But they're suing WSU because that's the narrative that Bryan Kohberger. And they may just simply be trying to get a quick buck. And before people already go off and, oh, that's they lost the daughter, this and that. I know it's callous. I know it's mean. I do not care. There are 4 victims in this. And that's why I created this whole thing, to get justice for the victims. To shine a light on the truth. And to call out the bullshit artists like Annie Elise. And as I mentioned, there are 4 victims in this case. And at this point, I would be okay with 5, but 4 of them, they will never celebrate another Christmas. They will never celebrate another birthday. They will never be able to hug their loved ones again. And there is 0 chance of it. Those are the victims. Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, and Ethan Chapin. Those are the victims. It isn't Stephen Goncalves. It ain't Christy Goncalves. It isn't Dylan Mortensen, Bethany Funk, Hunter Johnson, Jack DeCoeur, Jack Showalter. None of those guys are the victims. Those 4, they are. And that is why I made this channel. This is why I made this channel. To call out the people with millions, with hundreds of thousands, up to millions of subscribers. Annie Elise, 1.6 million subscribers, just went off on 25 some odd minutes of absolute bull. And I will call it out every single time it comes across my screen. Every single time. Without question. Because the truth all may be very, very painful. That is what has to prevail in every single case. The truth must prevail. And with people like Annie Elise, Nancy Grace, Brian Enton, Ashley Banfield, and everybody else pushing the narrative that Bryan Kohberger was the lone killer in this case, they are the problem. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that at the very minimum, there were multiple killers. And I don't think any of them was named Bryan Kohberger. So, those are, so that's my reaction to Annie Elise. If a settlement comes out of the Washington State Goncalves lawsuit, I will have something lined up and ready to fire off at will. And there are some other things that I'm going to be talking about in another video when that time comes. So, thank you all for watching. I'm Dylan Hildreth. This is Hildreth Investigates. We'll see you all in the next one.